Good afternoon, everybody. I am Patty Ryan, and I'm the CEO and President of the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce. And we are here today for a webinar on why business and professional ethics matter. It'll be presented by Jason L. Carter, and I'll talk a little bit about him in a few minutes. In the meantime, we did have some technical difficulties right at the beginning, getting Zoom to let us share our screen. So if you were temporarily kicked out of the meeting and are having trouble rejoining, you can reach out to Lauren Small, and Lauren can quickly send you an email with a link to get right back on. Her email is lsmall@lakewoodchamber.org, and she's watching her emails and texts right now. So to start off, I would like to go over some quick housekeeping notes, I guess, about Zoom. Most of you, I think, that are attending today have been on a Zoom call before, but if you haven't, only today's presenters have access to audio and video capabilities. So when it comes time for a question and answer period, which will be at the end of Jason's presentation, there's a Q&A dialog box that you click at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And what that does is it allows you to join the Q&A by typing in your question. And then just to make sure, Lauren and I will look over the questions and then we'll ask them directly to Jason. So just so we're not redundant and asking the same question over and over. And as time allows, he'll answer as many questions as he can. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share the link after the event. So again, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is our upcoming events. And again, I kind of went over, I'm the moderator. Our sponsor is Cuyahoga Community College Hospitality Management at West Shore Campus. Our speaker is Jason Carter, and thanks to Lauren for her support. We have a message from our sponsor today recorded, so cross fingers that that will work. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk to you about our November luncheon, which will be on November 18th. This is our joint luncheon with the Rocky River Chamber of Commerce. It's always really well attended. It will be a live event. And you can register on the Chamber's website or the Rocky River Chamber's website. Our speaker will be Dominique Masianu, who is a retired American Olympic gymnast and a gold medal winner. And so we're lucky that she lives locally. And thank you to Cox Business for lining her up to speaking to both organizations. So mark your calendars and remember you have to register for this event and it is live. Holiday events, believe it or not, it's almost Halloween and that means it's Christmas. So, but first of all, we want to acknowledge that Small Business Saturday, which Lakewood always participates in, is November 27th. It's always the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And so we want you to think local and support Lakewood businesses. We have a directory of all retailers and our restaurants and and where you can get gift certificates, etc., on the Chamber's website. And again, the Chamber will be hosting one of the most adorable things we do every year, which is the 4th grade Why I Love Lakewood essay contest in conjunction with Light Up Lakewood. We'll ask all of Lakewood's 4th graders to write an essay on why they love our community, and with a panel of respectable judges, we'll pick a winner, and that child will get to read their essay on stage with Santa Claus and the mayor at Light Up Lakewood, which is always a big event. And they receive a $100 cash prize too, which that's a lot of money in the 4th grade. So thank you to all our businesses that contribute to that. And then new this year is our 25 Days of Lakewood, which will be a holiday calendar raffle. The raffle begins November 15th and it goes through December 9th, which is 25 days. Each day we will do a drawing with gift cards, cash, and different maybe gift baskets, products from all of Lakewood's businesses. We're going to travel all around Lakewood, and we'll start with the West End, move on to Uptown, then Downtown, and then Birdtown. Tickets for this go on sale November 1st. So you buy one ticket and you're entered to win every day. You know, you can win twice, 3 times. One of the 25 prizes, for example, we have tickets to the Beck Center along with a $100 gift card to Georgetown. So the value of each day is at least $100. Each Friday, there's a $250 cash prize to spend local. So it's really kind of a fun way to engage the residents of our community with our merchants, our restaurants, our service industries, and raise some money for our scholarship program. And so this is kind of what the calendar will look like. Although you just buy kind of a raffle ticket through Eventbrite. Again, we'll send out that information. That takes place. Tickets go on sale November 1st, and it runs November 15th through December 9th. So now I am going to play the sponsor's message from Dr. Janice Taylor Hurd. She's the interim campus president of Tri-C West Shore.
Welcome.
Can you hear it now?
My name is Dr. Janice Taylor Hurd, and I have the privilege of serving as the interim campus president for Cuyahoga Community College's West Shore campus. I am sorry that I am not able to join you today, but I am grateful for the chance to welcome you through this video. The West Shore campus has been a proud member of the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce for more than 10 years, and we are thrilled to sponsor today's event. Certainly, the past 18 months have brought forward ethical questions and concerns, sometimes on a daily basis. Health privacy, employee safety, staffing, the use of government funds. These are just a few examples of the complicated matters that each of us grapple with daily. I am pleased that Tri-C's own Executive Director of Legal Services and Deputy General Counselor, Jason Carter, is able to lead in this important discussion today. So I will leave you in his very capable hands.
All right, so at this time, it's my privilege to introduce Jason Carter. I want to give a little bit of his background. It's pretty impressive. So he's been a practicing attorney for over 10 years. He has been assistant county prosecutor in the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, where he represented the county in criminal litigation, client and case preparation, pretrial, mediation, and trials. He's also served as assistant law director and prosecutor for the City of Euclid, and served in private practice as general counsel to various small to medium businesses in areas of formation, litigation, contracts, and employment disputes, represented administrative and tenured professors in employment negotiations, litigated in the area of criminal defense, civil, commercial, and contract disputes, and on and on. Jason received an Associate of Arts from Richland Community College in Dallas, Texas, and is a graduate of the University of Texas at Dallas, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Public Administration and a minor in psychology. He obtained his law degree from Cleveland Marshall College of Law. So this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Carter. Enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Patty, for a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. Often, you wonder who they're really talking about when these things happen. So I am quite grateful. And in this age of technology, bear with me as I get the presentation for you. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation. As previously stated, I am the Executive Director of the Office of Institutional Equity, Legal Services, and Deputy General Counsel at Cuyahoga Community College. It is my honor to serve in that capacity. You may or may not be aware of how far-reaching the institution is in our community, but since taking this position, I have learned about all the wonderful things that are offered, the wonderful offerings, the wonderful faculty, the administrators, and everyone at this institution that's so passionate about education. It was a wonderful opportunity for me because I went to college specifically, if you will, for the purpose of working in education. And so this is a wonderful opportunity. But my task here today is to attempt to, in the time that I have, talk to you about why business and professional ethics matter. And so the first thing that I want to talk to you about is integrity. And this may be a strange place for me to start this conversation, but I think it's a very important place for the conversation to happen. Integrity is something that I think is often overlooked when we think about what's necessary for us to have business ethic. And so I'll quote, or more or less paraphrase, one of my favorite passages. And please, this is not an attempt to proselytize, but it's a passage from the Bible. And that passage is that it's important that we not only clean the outside of the cup, but that we also clean the inside of the cup. And I think that's an essential concept for us, especially in the business world and also in the public sector. I think a lot of times what we want to focus on is making sure that our image to the public and how the public perceives us, that image is pristine. But many times there are things that we may be aware of or that we're not aware of that are occurring on the inside of the business that we really need to focus on. I think that it's really important to take an inside out approach to ensuring that our business complies with all of the regulatory requirements, that we are not engaging in conflicts of interest, and that we have sufficient integrity. I think one really important thing to bring out is that many times we think of integrity as a set of morals. But what we'll learn, and I'll cover a number of these cases towards the end of my presentation, is that having a moral compass or having kind of a moral view about how you govern your business, that in many cases that's insufficient because a lot of times our morals are governed by those around us. And so a lot of times if someone around us is engaging in something that's unethical, a lot of times our individuals within our business will do the same. And so it's important that we have a greater guiding light. And I think that guiding light, the question that we have to ask ourselves is whether the image that we're trying to portray on the outside is truly reflected on the inside, or are there inauthenticities? Is there an inauthentic relationship between what's inside the cup and what's outside the cup? And I think we should be willing to challenge ourselves on those inauthenticities. But let's get to some more concrete things to talk about. Slightly philosophical in my opening, but I want to have that as an underpinning for this discussion. So let's talk about conflict of interest. Ohio ethics law prohibits the use of authority or influence in an office to secure anything of value or the promise or offer anything of value. And this is really, really, really important. This is a place, I recently was a part of an ethics training, and this is a place where a lot of individuals find themselves running afoul of the ethics law. It is anything, securing anything of value. So I have a couple examples for you of issues that I've personally dealt with, that I've handled myself, that I think are really important. The first is the contractor conflict. And this is a situation where an individual was working for a public institution, and they were in charge of acquiring and managing and maintaining contractors. They developed a personal relationship with one of the contractors. In that personal relationship, while that contractor was doing work for the institution, this employee took a personal loan from the contractor. Of course, I think we see there that there's a conflict, that their position with the public institution, that they leverage that to acquire this contract. And so that individual was terminated from that institution. The second, the same individual, the personal contractor situation, is the second one I would bring to your attention. They then chose to use several of the public institution's contractors as their personal contractors, asking them to perform a number of services for them in exchange for preferential treatment as it related to their access to the public contract. So this is another situation that I'm personally aware of, that where the individual engaged in a conflict. The last would be closing the bid. This is a very interesting situation. This is another public employee who had oversight over a bid process. And what they ended up doing was really interesting. The bid would come in, and one of their associates was one of the bidders, and their associate did not get the bid. So this individual would then close the bid. They would then go and communicate with their associate exactly what they needed to do to meet the bid, to be the lowest and best bid. And then upon closing the bid, or sorry, after they closed the bid, they reopened the bid, and their associate, miraculously, if you will, acquired the bid. Other individuals within the department found out. Eventually an investigation ensued, and this individual was terminated. So these are all things that are happening real time, where if you ask me, I don't think many of these individuals really thought of themselves as nefarious individuals or individuals who were really trying to commit a crime. I think that they engaged in a series of really bad small decisions that led them to make these really large bad decisions, kind of the everyone is doing it mentality. And so these are examples of how you can find yourself in a bad situation, especially if you're in the public sector, but also the private sector, if these are the types of activities you choose to engage in. If you're not constantly reevaluating, or I'll talk later about doing a stress test of yourself personally, but also of your organization, to ensure that you're cleaning the inside of the cup. And so I think that these are some cases that really highlight that. With many of you, and many public or institutions have, or you serve on, a board of trustees. And so this is the next thing that I would like to talk about, are some of the rules related to when a conflict occurs when you're serving on the board of trustees. So an important rule for you to remember: if a matter comes before the board of trustees, which relates to another foundation or entity for which you are a board member, you must recuse yourself. Now, there are exceptions, and there's a more detailed presentation available to you from the Ohio Ethics Commission, but this is a real general rule that I think you want to have in mind. It's never wrong to recuse yourself just to be safe. And so that's the first rule. Forgive me, I took the slide back. The next is, there are other rules when you are on the board of trustees. As you know, you engage, or as you may or may not be aware, you engage in a conflict of interest when you have an unlawful interest in a public contract. When a trustee profits from a public contract they approve, or which was approved by a board in which they are a member. Now, there are exemptions to this. If you or the individual or your family member owns less than 5% of the private corporation, and there's a test also for when you can avoid the conflict. And to be fair, little known fact, not all conflicts are inherently unavoidable. Sometimes you have, inherently avoidable. Sometimes you have conflicts that are unavoidable. And so here's a test to determine how a contract for an institution that you have a private interest in can come before a board that you're on. The first test is whether the goods are necessary for that public institution, that there's no other feasible option to continue the course of dealings. Typically, the test is whether the relationship between the vendor and the public entity predated the trustee relationship. Is it a fair and good or equitable deal? Was there total disclosure and recusal? When recusal is insufficient, the trustee must leave the institution. Really important. Another important concept for us to think about is how to avoid the appearance of impropriety. I think this is really important because sometimes individuals they don't run afoul of a specific statute. They run afoul of the court of public opinion. Sometimes what you do is just wrong because it looks wrong or it feels wrong. Colleagues of mine often talk to me about situations like this when we're doing investigations, and they say, Jason, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it operates like a duck, it's a duck. And so we may not have a specific policy or provision in place that specifically addresses this issue, but we know that we can't treat the public dollar this way. So I would say that what you want to do is you want to always think of yourself as guilty until proven innocent. And I know that sounds a little bit contrary to how we understand the way the law works, but public opinion will often result in a conviction or result in a lot of detriment to you as an individual or as a business when you've engaged in something that just doesn't look right. So I would say it's exceptionally important to avoid the appearance of impropriety, which brings me to my next slide. Now, I labeled it bribes, but these are times where you are, when an individual with a public institution, and I really think it's important for private institutions to understand this, that public institutions or public employees cannot take anything that's considered substantial or improper. Now, there's not a specific amount. Early in my practice, individuals would talk about the 50% rule, or $50 rule. But that's not the way that the courts are arguing or understanding these cases when they come before them. The first thing we want to talk about is what defines improper. So improper typically is defined by who is the person who wants to offer the gift. Are they a potential vendor? Are they prohibited by law from offering you something of interest? Or do they have an interest before your institution? It's interesting to understand that this is not about motives. A lot of times when I see these kinds of cases, individuals will say, this was my friend, they weren't a bad guy, this was my family, they were trying to be nice, they didn't intend to do anything wrong. This rule is really not about motives, it's about this individual, this vendor's relationship with the institution. The second thing is what makes it substantial. So there are some examples that you want to consider, but I say always err on the side of caution. What we would say is if someone gives you a tiny box of chocolates, that in and of itself may not be considered substantial. Or if someone wants to buy you a golf ball, that in and of itself may not be substantial. But if they take you golfing, that could be considered substantial. So on the private side, you want to, especially if you're dealing with a friend of yours or someone you know, you want to be really careful about the things that you're asking them to engage in, because it can be perceived as you having them engage in a conflict of interest. And all of the things that we're talking about, conflict of interest, these things carry crimes. Some of them are 4th and 5th degree felonies. We'll talk a little later about individuals who have been found guilty of violating the Ohio ethics law and the consequences for that. And the consequences can be, they can be fairly severe. So I want to give you a couple real world examples of not only what we've talked about in terms of trustees, in terms of conflict of interest, but also things just to watch out for when you are starting a business or when you're engaging in a business. And this was a case that I actually represented the wife on in this case in my private life. And I like to think of it as the de facto partnership. These were two individuals who were previously married, but they were divorced. While divorced, they continued to cohabitate in the same residence. During that time, the only person whose name was on the home, the residence, was the wife's name. But the husband was performing a substantial amount, ex-husband was performing a substantial amount of work on the home. During that same time, over the span of about 14 years while they lived together, the wife would also contribute from her retirement into the husband's business. The husband would later start a bar. So you have these overlapping relationships, and at some point the parties disagreed and they wanted to go their separate ways. Well, what you had in this situation was you had the wife claiming an interest, an exclusive interest in the house because she was the only named party, but also an interest in the bar. You had the husband claiming, or ex-husband claiming an exclusive interest in the bar, but also claiming a labor-based interest in the home. The parties would sue. This would go before the court. I tell you that these are situations that you never want to have a court resolve. And in fact, the courts will do everything in their power not to resolve these kinds of situations. And so the situation was ultimately resolved via settlement. No one was happy. As we know, in many of these situations, it's hard to make everyone happy. But I'll tell you that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this. One of those is know when you're engaging in a de facto partnership. Know when the law would consider you to have engaged in a partnership that would give someone else, whether you want them to have the interest or not, an interest in something that you're creating. I would say it's exceptionally important in terms of business ethics to make sure that you're documenting everything accurately, that you're accurately accounting the source and the purpose of funds that you're taking from anyone you're taking funds from. Because if you're not, you leave yourself open for someone to come in and claim fraud or claim theft or claim an interest in your business, something that you've developed and you've matured yourself, and that you took this money in under a different set of circumstances, but they will make the argument, because you don't have the records to establish it, that what you intended to create was a partnership. In fact, it's important to note that in this case, one of the issues that we ran into was a retention schedule for the banks. One of the arguments was, look back at the information that was on the checks, or look back at the amount of money that was coming out of the accounts. Unfortunately, because of the retention schedule of the bank they were working with, it had a 7-year retention schedule. We were dealing with 14 years of history. And so we were not able to fully look back at everything that occurred at the time that some of these exchanges and agreements happened. So again, it is exceptionally important for you as a business owner to know what you're creating and to make sure you're maintaining proper records. The next one would be tax problems. This is something that I have run into multiple times, and it is the innocent partner. It's the individual who is a part of the business who really puts a lot of trust and faith in their partner. And that partner maybe is a little less risk averse than them, or maybe they are trying to grow the business at a faster pace than the market will allow. And so they've extended themselves, either creating a substantial amount of debt, or they've not been paying the taxes on a regular basis, or they just intentionally engaged in a fraudulent act and they have wronged some other vendors. And so those vendors all want to come and be paid. And I've had several instances of this pop up that I've represented various parties, either in bankruptcy or represented them in civil litigation matters. And so this is more common than you think. And so I would say it's exceptionally important, if you're in a business or if you're running a business, to have multiple checks in place to ensure the integrity of what's being spent and to ensure the integrity of the money that's going out. This is another inside of the cup matter that I was talking about. On the outside, everyone would have thought this business was exceptionally profitable. They owned several locations. They had gone through several renovations. Both of the partners lived in lavish homes. But on the inside, there was this growing debt, both tax debt and consumer debt, that they were creating, that one partner had no knowledge of. And so ultimately the business would go bankrupt and they'd have to dissolve the business because of these things that were happening within the business that ultimately led to its demise. So tax problems, these are real problems, real issues that present themselves. So another place where you want to make sure you're on top of what's happening. The next thing I mentioned there, sorry, before I move on, is the process of collections. If there's a debt, and if you've signed as a personal guarantor on that debt, that means that not only you, but all of your personal assets are subject to seizure and to be levied to pay those debts. I say that again, if you sign as a personal guarantor for any contract related to a business, it can impact your home, it can impact your family. And so you want to make sure you know what you're signing. You want to try as much as possible. And I know if you're a small business, sometimes it's difficult, but to not operate with a personal guarantee, but operate with your business credit. And I'm sure that there's lots of places where you can find that information. But if you are a personal guarantor, know what you're signing, know where the money's going, know how you're going to pay those debts. Because while bankruptcy is an option, bankruptcy has a lot of consequences associated with it. Another example, construction problems. This is another thing that I see a lot. This scenario was an individual who had constructed some modular homes. And when he constructed these modular homes, he did it for a much larger agency. While he was constructing these homes, the individual he was dealing with for the larger agency would come to him and ask him verbally for a number of change orders. Can you add this? Can you increase this? Can you paint this? A number of things. The entire time, the contractor believed that he would ultimately be compensated for all those changes. When the contract term ended, the customer wanted all of their goods. The contractor believed that they were due additional funds. They thought that they could hold the property until they were paid. This then led to litigation, very expensive litigation, where neither party won. And so this is another scenario where I say you must keep your records. You must document everything. If someone makes you a promise verbally, you should send them an email confirming that everyone's on the same page about that promise. This is another thing that's highly important to make sure you're managing an ethical business. Not only did it look bad for this individual personally, but the result of this litigation, the impact on their business, the impact on their resources began to impact their opportunities with other clients, other possible customers. At that time, they were entertaining some major contracts from some major cities within the United States to do something very similar. But upon being sued and upon initiating the litigation, as you know, a lot of people do not want to deal with individuals who are always tied up in court. And so it had a ripple effect on their business and really crippled their business for some time until they were able to try to get back on their feet. So another very important concept to keep in mind. The next would be receivership. And so I, throughout my practice, had the opportunity to represent a receiver. And you may or may not know what that is, but that's if someone files a lawsuit in court and there are multiple owners and it's necessary for someone else, a court-appointed receiver, an individual to step in, take over the business operations in order to wind it down, to pay all of the vendors and to pay all the debts and to pay the taxes while they're dissolving the business, the courts will appoint a receiver. What I want you to know is typically in those situations, the only person that wins is the receiver and the receiver's attorney. They are paid all the money that you should be making if you were not in that situation in order to take care of all of the bookkeeping, in order to take care of all of the legalities in order to wind that business down. So you never want to put yourself in a situation where despite your, or I would say, you never want to put yourself in a situation where you think that going to court is going to be your default solution to the problem. Going to court will cost you in a lot of cases more than it would have to just engage in a little preventative maintenance, engage in some regular maintenance on your business to ensure that you have all your documents together, to ensure that all the information you have is sound, and to ensure that you're not putting yourself in this situation. In this particular situation, they did not have an operating agreement. No one knew what the dissolution provisions were. No one knew exactly what was going on with the bookkeeping. They had multiple tax issues, but it was a highly profitable business. And it was unfortunate that this business had to go into receivership because these individuals, had they had a little more integrity about how they ran their business, could have continued to operate a highly successful business. The next one is auto fraud. And so this is an interesting case where there was a business on the west side of Cleveland that not only had they engaged in fraud because they had failed to pay the lease agreement with the city of Cleveland for their facility, but they were also selling cars and misrepresenting details related to the cars. And I happen to have represented one of the plaintiffs in the case. And the business thought that they could stand behind the arbitration agreement. So they thought that they could be as fraudulent and as evil as humanly possible, and they could sell cars because ultimately the most that anyone could get out of them was an arbitration where they thought that they could mitigate their damages. I would tell you in this case that we were able to successfully breach the arbitration agreement. We were able to sue them in a traditional civil case, and we were able to recover damages. And not only was my client able to recover, but multiple clients were able to recover damages as it related to the actions that were occurring. So again, it's very important that you operate with the high sense of integrity in all dealings. So I want to go over just a couple recent cases that have come out that I think drive some of these points home. And then I'll wrap up and ask for questions. But you may have seen the movie All the Queen's Horses. That was about the largest municipal fraud in the United States. It was in Dixon, Illinois. And the defendant in that case was Rita Cronwell. For her actions, Rita Cronwell was sentenced to 19 years in jail. Now, there's a caveat. She was sentenced to 19 years. She only served about 8 of those years because she was recently released just about in the last year due to COVID. They released a lot of individuals for nonviolent crimes. But that's a situation where someone lacked integrity. And in the movie, one of the questions that they'll ask is, how do you think this individual came to commit this crime? And the answer that the individual who did the documentary gives is quite compelling. It's not that they thought this person was kind of inherently evil or they thought that they were just going to do bad things. It was more or less that they started making really small bad steps and really small bad decisions. And that ultimately it led to them engaging in this scheme that landed them in jail for 8 years, ultimately initially was a 19-year sentence. But there are situations like this that are closer to home. So in Chagrin Falls, individual by the name of Debbie Bosworth was convicted of stealing $238,000. Interesting scenario. She was the clerk who processed incoming water and sewer payments. And in her situation, what she was doing was the payments that were coming in cash, she was keeping for herself, but recording them as having taken those payments in as a check. And ultimately, they were able to determine that what she was doing, and she was convicted of that. And then around the same time, there was a case out of Maple Heights, Carla Hopkins, who had stolen $43,000 from a booster fund. Similar situation, she was taking the cash payments. And so there are a couple things to learn from this. One is, what are typical small business errors that you can kind of find that lead to some of these concerns. The first I would say is lack of internal controls. So one important thing is to make sure that you have a check and a balance within your company, even if you have to pay for an external check and a balance, but you have that in your company to ensure that there's oversight. A lot of these situations would have continued to happen had there not been someone who decided to get curious. And I would say even in the Dixon Hill situation, because Rita Cronwell had a relationship with so many people in the community, in that situation, it wasn't even the curiosity that ultimately led to them finding out what she was doing. In her situation, she took a vacation and someone else started reviewing books that she had exclusive access to, and they were able to see exactly what she was doing. They noticed that there was an account that they had never seen before, and that kind of led to the dominoes falling. So you want to make sure that you have active controls. While I'm thinking of it, this was not in my notes, but I represented another business where they had one person in charge of all of their accounting. And that one person had decided that they were going to start paying their children's private school. They were going to go on vacation with, and they were going to pay for their mortgage, as well as many other things with the company's assets. And they did that for a number of years. And what allowed that to happen was a lack of controls. The only person, it was a single signature environment. There was no oversight, no external evaluation. And so in that situation, this individual was able to take hundreds of thousands of dollars that the company would never see again. In fact, because of how long it took for them to find this, there was a cutoff, a statute of limitations in terms of how much money they could get back from the various credit card companies. And so of those hundreds of thousands of dollars that were taken, very little of that were they able to actually get back. So again, it's important to have good controls. It's important to have independent oversight. I think it's important to rotate people into these single signer environments regularly, to have them give oversight and have them look at the books and make sure that there's not anything happening that could impact your business. Some ideas of how to catch them. We talked about, you want to have management review. If it's just you and an accountant, then you want to put yourself in the best situation possible to talk to your accountant or to talk to the person in that department to take a look at the books, or to have someone else take a look at the books to see what's happening. You want to make sure that there's appropriate training. You want to make sure that you have some type of policy and procedure in order to vet what's happening in your departments. And I would say this extends beyond just the financial world. In any area of your business, you want to make sure you have policies and procedures, because one thing that's true is most people want to do the right thing. And if you give them a policy that will guide them, you can increase the chances that they're going to do the right thing as it relates to your business. So having some type of prescribed rules for how things happen in your business is exceptionally important. I think it's important to do surprise audits, not scheduled audits, but surprise audits, to make sure that individuals stay on their toes, that they maintain a certain sense of integrity, because they never know when someone's going to come in and take a look at what they're doing. I think you should have segregation of duties as much as possible. Have different people have to sign off, multiple sign-offs, before money is spent over a certain amount, or before certain actions are taken. I think it's exceptionally important. So having spending limits and dual signatures. And so this was, I think, a 10,000-foot overview, if you will, of kind of how to improve the ethics in your business, how to do better, how to have healthier interactions with the public sector, as well as how to improve your integrity all around. And so I will yield the floor at this time for any questions.
Oh, sorry, guys. All right, let's see. I'm going to go to the Q&A. All right, so like we said, at the bottom of the screen, you can type in any questions that you might have for Jason. I have a couple here already. Oh, sorry, where are we? I'm going this way. There we go. All right, so are you ready, Jason?
I am.
Okay, so the first one is kind of HR related, maybe a little bit. And it is, the question is, what if your boss or employer asks you to do something you think is questionable? What action should you take?
So there are fraud hotlines, especially if you're in the public sector, that you can reach out to anonymously in order to ask them any questionable, to run something by them that you might think is questionable. In the private sector, it's a little more difficult, but there are definitely hotlines available. I think it depends on the nature of what you're being asked to do. I think sometimes the best thing to do is to not engage in something that you think could put you in a criminal situation. It may be a job you would have to resign for, unfortunately, but it would just depend a little more on where you are, public or private, and exactly what that action is. But I would say the rule of thumb is to protect yourself above all else.
That makes sense. So I think this question kind of stems more from when you were kind of talking about contractors and is there a source or a resource out there that would help someone be able to identify companies that act ethically versus companies that have a history maybe of shady business dealings?
I would say I wish. It would be the greatest thing ever. I would say that would be something great even for attorneys. If you know anything about me, you know I'm a bit of a cynic about attorneys. I think that kind of regardless of what your trade is, there are very good people, there are very bad people, and then there are people kind of in the middle. And with contractors, you can find yourself in the very same situation. It is very difficult, even sometimes when you get a referral, to find a really good contractor. There are some sites out there, Yelp and some other sites that try to allow people to comment on their experiences. I am not aware of a centralized location where all contractors are vetted for their quality, for their ethics, and for their performance. It's a situation I run into myself. I do have some trusted contractors that I really like, but I say, you want to get a referral and then you want to vet as much as humanly possible.
Someone did bring up the Better Business Bureau, but I know just from being in the chamber world that that's a membership organization. So while, I think most people think that they are, they do vet their businesses, but at the same time, you pay to become part of that organization, which in some ways makes it a little more questionable as far as whether or not the businesses that are listed are there because of membership or because of their reputation. So just
if I could speak a little bit more to that, Patty, I would say it's important to engage in your own due diligence. And I think what I mean by that is you can look on public websites to see if these individuals or their businesses have been sued. And that information is readily available to you. If they don't present you with a contract, I think that's an immediate red flag. You want a contract from these individuals outlining everything that they're intending on doing. You want to know whether there's an LLC, whether their LLC has been sued. And the LLCs are great because they protect us from, they protect the owners from lawsuit and from getting their personal assets levied. But you want to know if that's who you're dealing with, because one of the things that can happen, and that happens a lot, is you have a contractor that has an LLC, they don't do the work, you sue them, and they just shut down the LLC. That same threat is present if you have an individual, because what they can do is just file bankruptcy. And so it's a very, it's kind of a buyer beware, caveat emptor market out here when it comes to this issue. But I would say do everything, all the diligence you possibly can. There are a lot of free resources out there that you can look into to determine whether these individuals have a history of engaging in fraudulent conduct.
All right, I have another question. This one is, what about slander? If you feel your business or you have personally been slandered, is it worth fighting in court?
I love this question. I say no, but it depends on how egregious the slander is. So one element of slander that's important, libel or slander, or defamation ultimately. One element that's essential is harm. You have to be able to establish not only did they say something negative, but that they caused you financial harm. If you cannot clearly establish that their actions, that you can directly connect their actions to causing you financial harm, then I don't think it's worth it to go after them, because you have to be able to establish damages. So I would say, to some degree, not every time someone says something negative should you respond to it directly. sometimes, right, the media cycle, if you will, it'll be hot for a moment, and then the next moment, no one really cares. But if they have caused you harm, if you've seen business drop, if you have emails from individuals saying, I was going to, I was going to go with your business, but I looked online and I saw the following things. Unless you can establish that, I really don't think it's worth it. But I don't want to just open, I don't want to give, let me say this, right? The great legal disclaimer. None of this is legal advice. So you should ultimately consult an attorney. But I don't find libel and slander lawsuits to be beneficial unless you can really articulate what the harm is.
Okay, you ready for the next one?
I am.
It's kind of two-part. In a receivership situation, when the court appoints a receiver, can it be done against the business wishes or the wishes of the business owner? Is a receiver usually someone who is familiar with the company or completely independent? And does this always, okay, one last part of this. Does this always result in the business being dissolved?
Great questions. Great questions. So the court appoints a receiver based on the court's relationship with the receiver. Typically, they have no relationship with the business. Typically, it's not a known party. And yes, it can be done against the wishes of the owner. It can either be a petition of one of the parties. The court evaluates the petition and determines whether they want to grant it, or the court on its own motion can do it. I've been in situations where I had someone who was a owner of multiple units, multiple apartment complexes. And in that situation, what they were doing was so severe that they thought it was going to cause a detriment to all of the unit owners. And the court felt it was necessary to bring in a very experienced real estate receiver to take over the property, to stabilize it for the purpose of getting the property into the hands of a better owner. And that's because it represented a public interest and a public harm. And so in that situation, the court mandated the receiver. Does it always result in a dissolution of the business? Not always. There are times where sometimes the court will entertain settlements, or the parties can reach a settlement in lieu of a dissolution. Sometimes one party will take over the business, and if they have the funds available to pay the other party or buy the other party out, or if the court finds that one party engaged in fraud sufficient that, or some type of malicious action sufficient that they would want to find a way to allow one person to run the business. And I think that's the pro and the con of going to court, is once you file that lawsuit, someone else, for the most part, unless you reach a settlement, is in control of your future. So again, you want to have a high integrity business in order to minimize the possibility of ever going in front of a court.
Okay, thanks. And then I think we have time for one more, and it's, what do you do if you suspect an employee is of wrongdoing? For example, I think they're talking about your example of like an employee who, until she went on vacation, they didn't know she was embezzling from the company. So what do you do if you suspect that?
That's a great question as well. So many great questions. You have a great audience here. So the first step you want to do is you want to have a conversation with your local prosecutor, and you want to let them know, you want to gather all of your records, gather everything that you think would support your claim, and have that conversation with your local prosecutor. And you want to put that person on leave. And again, I say consult an attorney, but typical best practice is if you have questions about whether or not, like if you're curious and you want to do an additional investigation, but you also want to stop the bleeding, you would put that person on paid leave. If you're fairly confident that that individual engaged in this conduct and you're just trying to find some time to get to a prosecutor so that they can investigate the theft or the crime or the embezzlement or whatever it is, you can terminate that person or put them on unpaid leave, pending someone indicting or doing some type of evaluation of the information that you have. But always, I think it's important to always take action if it's necessary to stop the bleeding. You don't have to keep someone in, even if you suspect it, but you're not sure. You're not under any obligation to keep that person in your business until you know for sure whether or not they're engaging in some type of nefarious activity.
All right. And I'm just checking to make sure that there's no more out there with Lauren. I think, let's see here. I think that's it for now, and that's perfect because we're running out of time anyhow. So thank you very much, Jason. This is really very informative. I think also kind of interesting because we all like to kind of know, stories of unethical behavior. Maybe it's because they're cautionary tales, if nothing else. And but again, we really appreciate your time today. We really appreciate the staff at Tri-C West Shore for making this connection for us and helping us find you somebody to talk on the subject. And we're on Zoom here, but we'll kind of do a virtual round of applause for how well you did today. We really
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all the wonderful questions.